Can you imagine you're a parent and your son leaves the house and you say, Jimmy, I love you so much. Go have a good day in school. And your son comes back with a brutal operation. Can you?
That said the minimum drinking age needs to be 21. We can do the same thing when it comes to banning genital mutilation or chemical castration.
Okay.
I know Ron's been
Okay.
Either, but she's on the cover of Time magazine. Oh, or he's on the cover of Time magazine.
Now she wants to do transgender operations on illegal aliens that are in prison.
The North Star here is transgenderism is a mental health disorder.
Welcome to our singular podcast episode featuring me, Lane Withers.
And me, Stephen Garrick.
Okay, today we are delving into the diverse world of transgender healthcare and its future post-2024 election with Trump's win. Stephen is going to be defining what gender-affirming care is, the perspectives of healthcare providers on this issue, and the mental and physical health statistics of transgender youth nationally.
And after that, Lane will be digging into the policy wish list that is Project 2025, specific legal cases that will impact transgender healthcare, and the rights wrongs, a special segment clearing the air of popular conservative conspiracy theories about trans people.
We'll also have interviews with people in our building, Merrill C., the Trans Inclusive Housing Building, but let's start with the basics. So, Stephen, do you want to start us off with some vocab?
Of course. So before we go any further, we'll just define some of the basic things we'll be talking about throughout the whole podcast. First of all is the term transgender, of course, which is just an umbrella term for people whose gender identity and or expression is different from cultural expectations based on the sex they were assigned at birth. After that, the term to transition refers to the process by which some people strive to more closely align with their gender identity. Which brings us to gender-affirming care. Gender-affirming care, sometimes referred to as transition-related care, is life-saving medical healthcare for transgender people of all ages. It's not a single category of services, but instead is a range of services, including mental health care, medical care, and social services.
Gender-affirming care is often used in transgender spaces, but gender-affirming care is for everybody, transgender or cisgender.
Mm-hmm.
I was watching a tutorial on how to put trans tape on like maybe 1 or 2 days ago, and the person in the video who was teaching me how to do it is a cisgender woman.
Hi, I'm Wynn, and I've been using trans tape about for 4 or 5 years now, and I use it for dual purpose. I use it when I get on stage as a drag king, and I also use it in my...
And as something less niche, gender-affirming care can also refer to breast augmentation surgery.
Mm-hmm.
Like, why would a woman want bigger boobs other than for the fact that she identifies as a woman and that having bigger boobs affirms her gender identity?
Mm-hmm.
So that's a form of gender-affirming care. For men, there's a condition called gynecomastia. I will correct that later. Which is basically where cisgender men have like an abundance of breast tissue and they get something very similar to top surgery for men.
Oh, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. And I've seen these cisgender men get targeted on social media.
Yes.
Like, oh my god, you're transgender, you're
Yes.
female, you'll always be a girl, XX chromosomes forever. And it's like, dog, I have a penis and balls.
I've seen that actually.
Like, I think that's so funny. You know what else is gender affirming care? Viagra.
Real.
Like, Viagra affirms a man's gender identity because you would only want your dick hard if you felt like a man. If you... Doesn't that affirm your sense of being a man and masculinity?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that, like, gender affirming care is a term that is so broad that it's going to kick these conservative politicians in their ass later because they're banning stuff that they actually like Viagra and hair transplants and gynecomastia surgery. So just wanted to pop in and say that.
After that, we have gender dysphoria, which is defined as clinically significant distress caused when a person's assigned birth gender is not the same as the one with which they identify. And gender dysphoria can be linked to negative mental and sometimes physical health consequences, which highlights the importance of gender-affirming care.
Can I add something about the gender dysphoria definition? So it's not just distress about like one's body, which I feel like is not like kind of like a misconception. It can also be like a lot of people struggle with like being called the wrong pronouns. That's also part of gender dysphoria. Or like being forced to wear a dress when they would rather wear a suit. Things like that. That's also gender dysphoria.
Mm-hmm. Then the next item on our list is HRT, which is hormone replacement therapy. This is just a common form of medically transitioning, and it involves the prescription of testosterone or estrogen depending on the patient. And then another form of another form of gender-affirming care could be puberty blockers or simply blockers, and these are a type of medication that can temporarily pause puberty and are fully reversible. And the difference between this and hormone therapy is puberty blockers are generally prescribed early in puberty, while hormone replacement therapy is I don't know.
Yeah, well, I know like most people who do hormone replacement therapy, I think, well, my brother didn't do puberty blockers, but he started HRT in high school, and I think most people I know start after they're 18 just because the process is a lot easier.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say.
Yeah, but you can start hormone replacement therapy before then. The exact age, I'm not sure. We're not endocrinologists, guys. Talk to your endocrinologist for that. For what works for you is what we're trying to say.
For sure.
And HRT is not just for transgender people. HRT can also be used for cisgender people in some cases. Like, I don't know, some guys just have low testosterone levels. Or, vice versa with women. With estrogen. I think I will jump right into the legal section talking about Project 2025. So I'm going to start this by saying when I initially started working on this project, my idea was to look at like a bunch of anti-transgender legislator from different sources, but I started reading Project 2025 and I was like, ooh, this one's a doozy. So that's the main focus of the legal section of this project is Project 2025, just because it's so broad and it mentions the word gender over 100 times. Some of those are not related specifically to transgender people, but most of those 100 times are. And as part of my little legal section, I'll be looking at two major cases that will impact transgender health. One that has set legal precedent for LGBTQ+ rights for the past few years, and one that has yet to be decided on. So, going into Project 2025. So, for clarification, just to start off, I'm going to be referring to the, quote, mandate for leadership, the conservative promise as Project 2025, even though that is not the correct title. Project 2025 is the group that created the mandate, but most people know and refer to this document as Project 2025, so that's what I'm going to refer to it as, and also it's just way easier to say than the mandate for leadership, the conservative promise. So, as aforementioned, Project 2025 is essentially a policy wish list written by over 400 conservative authors with varying expertise, from policy to science. It was pioneered by a group called the Heritage Foundation, whose mission is to formulate and promote public policies based on the principles of free enterprise, limited government, individual freedom, traditional American values, and a strong national defense. Although its authors have said that it is not made for Trump, it was kind of written with Trump being reelected in mind, as his views align with a lot of the Heritage Foundations, and his name pops up in the document several times. So considering that choosing to transition is a matter of individual choice, therefore individual freedom, I was surprised to see the quote-unquote issue of trans people pop up so much in this document. Like, guys, why are you so obsessed with us? You want to swoosh that bad? Just kidding, but seriously, guys. Okay, just because this document goes into so much detail about us, trans people, I'm going to be breaking down these mentions into 5 main sections, which are parental rights, foreign aid, military, redefinition, legal wording, and the targeting of specific organizations, programs, and councils. So I think that the opening statements really captured the basis of Project 2025's argument really well. Well, anti-trans argument, I should say, really well, which is children suffer from the toxic normalization of transgenderism, with drag queens and pornography invading their school libraries, which is quite literally on page 1. And in promise number 1, restore the family as the centerpiece of American life and protect our children, end quote. They continue, pornography manifested today in the omnipresent propagation of transgender ideology and sexualization of children, for instance, is not a political Gordian knot inextricably binding up in disparate claims about free speech, property rights, sexual liberation, and child welfare, etc., which is on page 5. I noticed as I was going through this document, reading these statements, that statements about trans people in this document are always coupled with statements about pornography or sex. These statements reveal the very core of their anti-transgender argument, which is that being transgender is inherently sexual, which further reveals to me 2 things. Well, I can posit 2 things. So this is alleged, but I think that many people's first and only experience of or with trans people is through pornography, and the main content of trans pornography is trans women, which can be inferred that emulating femininity is being sexual, meaning that there's something inherently sexual about being a woman, feminine, etc. I heart misogyny. Steven, do you think I'm wrong?
I don't. I think you bring up a good point with the misogyny, because the fact that emulating femininity means being sexual is something I hadn't thought of before. And especially, I don't think, it's just interesting how the misogyny is tied to, you were looking for instances of transgender being mentioned, which are like, the fact that these 2 are linked.
Yeah. And I think that the transphobia is very linked to misogyny, becomes more apparent throughout the document when anti-trans rhetoric is also coupled with pro-life arguments and anti-abortion arguments. Like, they are often side by side.
Right.
So that was very interesting to me. And I went on a little tangent here in the script, but I think anti-trans rhetoric creates this vicious cycle of continual fetishization and oppression, which is that trans people are seen as sexual reprobates, then they face discrimination, including being unable to get a job because of their identity, and then trans people, especially Black trans women, are forced into sex work to survive, and then the cycle continues. So all of this is to say that the basis of their argument is false, that being transgender is not an inherently sexual thing. People don't transition because they fetishize the gender that they're trying to transition to. The only people doing the fetishizing are cisgender heterosexual men who control the narrative of porn and its trends, because let's be real, those are the main people consuming porn, and porn is made with the male gaze in mind because those are its main consumers.
Ironic.
Which is super ironic. So it's time to finally dig into the first section of Project 2025, starting with parental rights. So I guess if I were a parent, a conservative parent looking at being transgender, a lot of their arguments about protecting children, quote unquote, make a lot of sense. If I believed that my child was being shown pornography in school, I'd want to put a stop to it. But I think conservatives wildly exaggerate the amount of transgender representation in schools, and the transgender representation that is there is not at all sexual in nature and is often just, here's a transgender child. Isn't that cool, guys? Project 2025 assures that schools serve parents, not the other way around. I feel like, in my humble opinion, I'm not an educator, I'm just a student. I feel like schools should serve kids, not the parents, because the kids are the ones that are in school.
Wait, when they say schools serve parents, not the other way around, does that mean they think at the moment it's parents serve schools? And then what does that mean?
That this transgender ideology and woke ideology is being pushed on them, and that's why parents serve schools, because they serve that school's ideology by just sending their kids to public school. Is kind of the vibe that I got. In lieu of all this, one of Project 2025's policies is to make it a federal crime for a school to assist in a transgender student's social transition, by the way, not medical transition at all, by changing their name, gender marker, or pronouns on school documents. Parents would have full access to these documents to ensure that there is no obfuscation of their child's papers. So, given the reins to the parents, once again. By the way, all of these things can be changed at any time. It's not permanent to do a name change. Everybody. And for parents who do support their child's transition, Project 2025 would make medical transitioning for minors, even with parental consent, a federal crime. So you want parents to have more rights, but only the parents that you agree with.
Exactly.
They mention, like, a lot of times, like, genital mutilation. I think they say that, like, supporting kids in their medical transition is child abuse. This document, I wish I put which page it said that, but it does say that, guys, trust. Actually, I'm not making shit up. I did read this document. You should believe me because I'm transgender, and if you don't, it's actually transphobic, guys.
That's crazy.
So, moving on to the next section, foreign aid. So, Project 2025's authors do not enjoy USAID's current policies on abortion and gender ideology, noting that it encroaches on religious freedom and mirrors the organization's resistance to partnering with faith-based organizations. Quote, the promotion of gender radicalism is anathema to the traditional norms of many societies where USAID works, causes resentment by tying life-saving assistance to rejecting the aid recipient's own firmly held values regarding sexuality. So their critiques of USAID are mostly about abortion, but in general, it's bringing up perspectives against the traditional norm is not a bad thing, and they talk about these countries as if they're a monoculture and not a diverse set of people with different beliefs about gender and sexuality. many of these countries before colonization actually believed in a more diverse gender experience. So I think that's not true. So although Project 2025 does point out a big issue in my field, which is global health, which is injecting white culture into impoverished countries through aid, doctors are way too busy saving people's lives to talk about trans people. I've watched a lot of documentaries where they literally don't have like gloves, like they're reusing gloves, and there's like not enough beds, there's not enough basic supplies. So there's just not time for doctors to be instilling gender ideology into these people. Like there's not enough time to talk about trans people. Maybe if these programs were properly funded, these impoverished countries would be able to look inside themselves. Like, have you guys seen that meme about Palestine where it's like, oh, there are no gay people in Palestine. Palestinian people would kill you. And then
Also, if you want them to be gay, just stop bombing them. Like, they'll get to gay, you know? Like, they're busy. They don't have time to be like, who am I in the deepest parts of my soul? Like, you can't watch your village get blown up and be like, I think I'm bisexual, actually. Like, that's not...
when your community is being crippled by poverty and disease, there's not time to think about your sexuality and your gender identity.
Yeah.
And Project 2025 creates this false dilemma that you either have to solve poverty or you can have transgender rights, when in reality, the movement for universal health coverage thinks that these are both sides of the same coin. Like, we can have both. Another critique of US aid is to rename the USAID's Office of Gender Equality and Women's Empowerment to Office of Women, Children, and Families, to have an unapologetically pro-life stance. And in general, they're against trans people because they think it is anti-family. So that's also a part of like their pro-life opinion. Like, they think that by being transgender, they think transgender people can't have families, basically, which is very strange for like transgender and gay people. I'm like, okay. And I'm gonna talk about the military just for a little bit. Veterans and service members can't get gender affirming care under military healthcare programs. Transgender people can't be accepted into the military because, quote, gender dysphoria is incompatible with the demands of military service, end quote. HIV positive people also can't be accepted into the military, just as a little side fact. We are quite literally regressing as a society, guys. And Project 2025 also is very set on removing a lot of content from legal documents that references gender in any sense. List of terms they want banned: sexual orientation and gender identity, diversity, equity, and inclusion, gender, just the word gender, gender equality, gender equity, gender awareness, gender sensitive, abortion, reproductive health, and reproductive rights. And they want to ban all of these words in legislature because it infringes on First Amendment rights, infringes on their freedom of speech.
Okay.
Guys, the setup is so clear. Like, do I even have to say anything? The irony is right there. Moving on to targeting of specific legal organizations. So, they hate the NIH. They don't like the National Institute of Health because they are the biggest face in pushing, quote, junk gender science, abolish their DEI office, stop funding research about trans people, and instead fund studies into the negative effects of gender-affirming care and the likelihood of desistance if young people are given counseling that does not include medical or social interventions.
So trying to fund studies specifically into what they want evidence for?
Yes. which is totally how legitimate scientific research
100%.
goes, guys. That's
Sorry, that caught me off guard.
It does catch me off guard, and the counseling part specifically catches me off guard because, just a guess, in my opinion, allegedly, this sounds like conversion therapy. When
Yeah.
they're saying to
That was my first thought.
put these children through counseling instead of gender affirming care, it seems like they're talking about conversion therapy. Like, they're not saying it, but that's what's being implied. And also, this is just not how research works. Like, you can't, like, start with the conclusion and then cherry pick evidence after you make your conclusion.
Exactly.
So they also want to abolish the Gender Policy Council that was made under Biden's administration with the intent to restrict the promotion of reproductive care, sex education, and gender-affirming care. They also don't like Health and Human Services because they should protect children from, quote, genital mutilation, end quote, and gender ideology. So I guess they're promoting that right now. Thank you, RFK Jr., for saving us from gender ideology. I will definitely never, ever take my testosterone ever again. The CDC should end its collection of data on gender identity. And finally, the Office of Science and Medicine, the OASH, I don't know what that stands for, I'm so sorry. They should review literature for the lack of evidence for gender-affirming care and withdraw recommendations for that care. So, in general, they don't like science and health organizations. Who knew? Who knew?
Curveball.
So that's the end of all my sections.
I liked junk gender science. Was that a direct quote?
That was a direct quote. Yes.
That's crazy.
Actually. I wanted to end this all by saying that according to the Heritage Foundation's own research, which they did not provide, providing these treatments does, quote, not reduce the suicidality of these young people and may even increase suicide rates, which is a very strong statement to not back up with evidence. So I actually sent them a little email. I went undercover as a cisgender. I put on my cishet sona.
As a cisgender.
And I put on my cishet sona, and I emailed them asking if they could provide their data on this. I did look for it before emailing them, and I couldn't really find it, to be honest. And in our interview with Elizabeth, she actually says that
if I was informed I would never be allowed to transition medically, I would kill myself, like genuinely.
yeah.
Like I wouldn't be alive if it wasn't for HRT. So, any attempt to ban it, I feel is like quite literally murder.
And I know a lot of trans people who mirror that same sentiment. And I also know people who have detransitioned. They're very happy. They don't regret their experience at all. I would highly encourage listeners to look up some detransitioned influencers, because not all of them are anti-trans and not all of them regret the care that they have gotten. And the only reason why you hear statistics like, oh, 40% of trans people kill themselves, is because of legislator like Project 2025 continually oppressing us and promoting anti-trans rhetoric that leads to violence against us. I feel like I've been talking for so long. I think
All good
Stephen
things.
should go into some perspectives from healthcare providers.
All good things, though.
We'll hear some nice stuff from people who are educated in their fields and know what they're doing.
So essentially, after looking at things like Project 2025 and right-wing legislature and points of views and things like that, We wanted to pivot to talking about some of the other demographics who are lending their voices to this issue, one of them being healthcare providers and healthcare professionals, to see where they stand with their field of work becoming more and more politicized. So one of the most compelling documents I found was a survey that was put out by 5 researchers from universities in Michigan, Pennsylvania, Rhode Island, and West Virginia. They collected survey responses from over 100 healthcare providers in all 50 states, and the purpose of the survey was to gauge what various healthcare professionals thought about increasing politicization of gender-affirming care in general, and then more specifically how they thought their patients would be impacted. And the general consensus, what the respondents got back to them with, was how distressed and concerned they were for the well-being of their patients in the face of, threats to their healthcare. Quote unquote, "I'm very upset that legislators who likely do not have any personal experience or knowledge of transgender health are making healthcare decisions for families," end quote. Another respondent said, quote, "Preventing me from using my training and expertise to do my job shows such a lack of understanding and trust in medical training on the part of lawmakers." Respondents to the survey described how denial of evidence-based gender-affirming care for transgender individuals will necessitate more serious and costly interventions, including avoidable surgeries later in life.
To better explain this issue, I'm going to bring up the example of chest binding. So chest binding is the practice of compressing your breast tissue to make your chest appear more flat, more masculine, as some people think. But a lot of people don't have access to things like trans tape or binders, which are compression shirts, to avoid nerve damage. So a lot of transmasculine individuals in states that ban gender-affirming care or that are transphobic will use things like duct tape to bind their chest, which can cause super serious nerve damage, can make it harder to breathe, you can't exercise as well. So that's one example of, and nerve damage healthcare is way more invasive than top surgery. So that is one effect of banning transgender healthcare that providers are talking about here.
And it can be argued that when we're talking about banning healthcare, we can maybe take into account the opinions of the people, I don't know, who went to school for this kind of thing?
Yeah.
Loki. Second survey that I found actually talks more about how healthcare providers feel about how they are able to carry out their job when dealing with transgender patients. Okay, so most importantly from this survey was the fact that, quote, end quote, overall 85.7% of clinicians were willing to provide routine care to transgender patients. They suggested improving communication between doctor and patient. So one example that they brought up was that the terminology for non-binary identities varies from person to person.
It's that, like, they went to medical school, like, maybe, like, 20, 30 years ago. Like,
Yeah,
when,
that too.
like, transgender people were not talked about ever.
Mm-hmm.
And they have patients now who are transgender, and they're like, it's not coming from a bad place, but their knowledge is older, perhaps.
Yeah.
I think this is also like a really interesting tie into like how, you know how like the majority of people who voted for Trump were less educated. Like a lot of voters who are blue are among the most educated people in the country, which is to not make a dig at Republicans' intelligence. It's just to say that they benefit from having an uneducated base. and clinicians are part of people who are the most educated people in the country.
Yeah.
So it makes sense that a lot of them swing blue, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, good point.
And Elizabeth actually brings this up when I interviewed her, and she made it as a dig to Republicans, which is, which is understandable because she was, targeted by anti-trans people at her school. It's only fair to give a jab back. But yeah, I don't know where I was going with that. I just thought I should mention that. It's just fun.
One thing you did mention a second ago, which is a little off track, but it was when you said doctors who got their degrees 30 or 40, 20 or 30 years, 30 or 40 years ago, and are now dealing with just a higher abundance of patients who don't identify with their sex assigned at birth. And that reminded me of the thing where people go, oh, where did all the transgender people come from? I swear nobody was trans in the 60s or whatever.
Yeah.
And I don't know, you should remind me of that, because that's another thing that came up in my research about when we were researching right-wing myths,
Yeah. It's why are there all these new transgender people? And it's maybe it's because you killed them all in the AIDS epidemic. Not to be that guy. And I think this is the perfect segue into our special segment, the rights wrongs. I'm so excited for this segment. Just because I think it's funny. We're gonna have a goof and a gaff about our oppression, guys.
Oh my God.
It's gonna be so much fun.
It's a coping mechanism.
So, my remains laughing at us. Okay, so
everybody's laughing at us.
everyone's laughing at us. We're just a big joke to society. So, my first and probably favorite conspiracy theory about transgender people is transvestigation or transvestigators, which is a group. There's a specific group on Facebook that believes that everybody in Hollywood is secretly transgender.
Wait, what?
And I'm going to say, okay, I need to give credit where credit is due. Lots of this information is adapted from a YouTube video by D'Angelo Wallace on YouTube. I highly recommend checking him out.
It's not just the usual targets for conspiracy nuts, Lady Gaga or Michelle Obama to name a couple, but seemingly anyone. Harry Kane, trans. Phoebe Waller-Bridge, inverted. The Rock, you better believe he's got a biologically female skull. 6 feet tall and 1 million pounds of muscle is not enough if, according to this chart, your skull is wrong. ? They pick the stupidest things to hyperfixate on too, like the angle at which The Rock walks. Because his legs are not perfectly straight, they don't think that this man is a man. Fellas, is it biologically female to walk?
It's so crazy to think about, and it's you look at it and you kind of laugh, but a lot of the people targeted by transvestigators are Black women and celebrities. I think the most popular example of this was in the most recent Olympics with the female boxer.
Yes.
I want to say Amani Khalif, I want to say her name was.
Okay.
And a bunch of people were like, oh, she's actually transgender because she's masculine and she won the sports game. It's maybe you guys are only saying this about brown women, actually. So I love misogynoir, guys. So another way that transphobia ties into misogyny. Deeply interlinked with misogyny.
I do they call themselves transvestigators? Because that's actually the gayest thing I've heard.
It's kind of camp.
It's that's what I'm saying. It's what the fuck?
It's kind of giving like a Doofenshmirtz invention. You don't know what I'm talking about. But My second conspiracy theory is that transgender people are pedophiles and they're groomers, and trans women dress up as women to touch little girls in the bathroom.
Oh my god.
Oh my god, guys! Let me start this off by saying that I'm pretty sure that there are little to no prosecutions against trans women or trans people. But the Catholic Church has a very, very long history of sex abuse against children, and it still runs rampant today because nobody wants to prosecute them. And a lot of the people who wrote Project 2025 and who are anti-trans are also Catholic and advocate for quote-unquote religious freedom, which means that they want their religion instilled into schools and the government, etc.
Oh my god.
So I'm like, guys, the call is coming from inside the house. It's not us, baby. Go look at your church. Make sure your children aren't alone with the priest, guys. I'm just saying. And I'm joking about it, but it's actually like a really, really disgusting trend, and I'm very glad I grew up atheist. So, and just as a note, if a man wanted to touch children in public restrooms, he would just walk in and do it. A man isn't gonna go through the embarrassment of dressing up as a woman to sexually harass women, other women. And if a man dresses up in a dress, makeup, pink, whatever, goes into a restroom and sexually harasses women, that's a man. That's not a trans woman. He's not identifying with being a woman. He's doing it with the intent to commit a crime. Trans women are just out here living their lives. They just want to live lives of women. They want to go in there and piss. So for our next section, we are going to be interviewing 2 trans women from our building, the Trans Inclusive Housing Building. Shout out Meryl C. So their names are Lynn and Elizabeth, and here are their interviews. Thank you so much for joining us, guys. Maybe first I should ask, where are you in your transition, sharing whatever you're comfortable with, and what do you think the prospects of your transition are after the election?
Currently, my transition, I'd say my transition is going pretty well. Obviously, I am part of the majority that does not regret anything. I am very happy with my transition as it stands currently, and I plan to continue my transition. Though a little bit of my future plans have been, messed up by the election because I don't know what legislative changes to expect. So I've been doing like a standard practice in the trans community of stockpiling my hormone replacement therapy, which I won't speak on all trans people, but it's something that I've been able to start doing, and I know a couple other people who have started doing it. The overall, I'm not sure how much the 2024 election will really affect, like, me specifically, because I have like ways of attaining my HRT through legal channels that wouldn't be able to be banned per se. Like very bad with certain things. I've had to change a few things with my transition. Like I had to go from every 5 days injecting my estradiol, which is a feminizing hormone used for hormone replacement therapy, every 5 days to every 7 days, which I was going to do anyway due to the results of the election to help create more of a stockpile. But yeah, there has been a struggle with higher prices when it comes to prescriptions, which has been kind of devastating, but for the most part it has stayed the same.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I started trying to pursue hormonal transition a little over 2 years ago, Been on hormones for, around a couple years. I think, like, accessing hormones in California is definitely easier than some other states and parts of the country. It's still not like a fun process, and it still takes forever, and there's still people who tell you no for like absolutely no reason. But eventually, you can get there, and that's the important thing. I do feel very fortunate to live in this state, and probably going to be living here for quite a while, it seems. But I think in terms of my own life as a Californian, I think Trump's policies are just going to divide the country more. It's just going to make areas that are unsafe even more unsafe. And it's going to make, like, for us states that do, actually support trans people, I think it's going to be more important for us to, keep that up and, serve as a stronghold and a safe haven for trans people. I think we'll probably see like another mass move out of LGBTQ families from like southern states or Midwestern states like we saw in 2016. I already know of people that are personally moving to Canada.
Do you know trans people in other states, like online?
I'm significantly less online than I used to be, I must say. One of the few online friends that I still like talk to often, he's a cis guy, but he lives in Georgia, and he's
dang.
Well, actually no, he is bisexual. I forgot about this. He had recent developments, but anyways, he's really unhappy with, he was in a swing state, like his vote and the vote of everyone around him really mattered, and the outcome is like really not good for him and a lot of his friends. He's I definitely feel for him, and like I do. Well, I have family in Texas, actually. I'm gonna visit them over Christmas. And that's something I'm mildly worried about, but we'll see how it goes, I suppose.
Worried about because of their views, or worried for them?
Oh, well, I mean, they're just like old cishet people. I'm not worried for them. I'm worried for myself. Flying to Texas and being in I mean, it's only gonna be like 4 days, and I'm not gonna I'm mostly just spending time with family, and they could be much worse for Texans. Like, they're fine people mostly. But like, if we go like to a restaurant or whatever and I have to use the bathroom, like, what am I gonna do?
Ooh.
That's the kind of thing I'm worried about. Or the airport.
I'm
definitely gonna feel the difference between Texas and California, I think, in the public eye.
Okay, next question. Have your plans for transition changed since the election, or do you think that because you live in California, it's mostly stayed the same?
My league right now in terms of like time and money and such.
Yeah.
So it's like, that didn't really change for me, I don't think.
Because probably you were considering doing that like after Trump's presidency would have ended. Like, I mean, once you graduate college, maybe.
I mean, for me, like, as a Californian, whether I get a gender-affirming surgery or not is not a question of who's president. It's the question of, do I have enough money to afford this? And, like, do I have the time to recover? Well, because it's not like I'm going to go to Texas to get the surgery. Like, all the surgeons are, like, I think I know there are some in California, but otherwise you could go to Asia or, like, New Zealand or something. I don't remember,
wait.
but...
Really? Oh, I didn't know that. Like, being in this building when the results came out, like being in like a trans-inclusive housing situation, was it like, yay, I get all this support from people, or was it like, man, everyone's so depressed after the election?
So yeah, specifically post-election, I think there's been a slight shift towards like this building itself, but I don't really feel the culture of the building has changed that much. Like, I will say there has been like truly there's not really been a lot of talk about the election other than, wow, that's messed up. Or it's like, wow, like this country is like just doesn't care about us, you know? Which is like objectively true.
Yeah.
Or I shouldn't say this country, I should say just a majority of people do not care about trans rights and will actually be spurred on to vote for someone because they are anti-trans. I mean, I talked to my roommate about it. I had some choice words to my roommate about it.
Like, obviously the news hit everyone here pretty hard, but most of us here aren't the type of people where we just like self-isolate when things like don't feel good, because like, you know, I really like the community we have in this building. Like, people actually socialize, and like, you know, we like, people are always asking like, hey, does anyone want to go to dinner together? I think that's awesome, because we do care about each other. And so, you know, there's both. Obviously it's not like we're gonna pretend everything's all cool, but you know, we're not gonna let each other, you know, feel too down or whatever.
Yeah. And the final section of our project is going to be focusing on the 2 legal cases that I found the most relevant while reading Project 2025, and this is the perfect way to wrap up our podcast as we start to look into current events. 2 main court cases that I wanted to look at are Boystock versus Clayton County. So basically, this man had a really good employment history, was an employee of Clayton County, worked there for 10 years with no complaints from his boss. His boss, he mentioned in casual conversation that he was gay to his boss. His boss fired him the next day. So the Supreme Court decided, in lieu of all that, Supreme Court decides that to discriminate against someone on the basis of their sexuality, they first have to discriminate against someone on the basis of sex, violating the Title VII Civil Rights Amendment against sex discrimination. So, to judge someone for being gay, you first have to judge them for being a man loving another man, or being a woman loving another woman, etc. And the reason why this case is relevant to transgender people is because Project 2025 wants to basically roll back Boystock v. Clayton County's applications on hiring and firing people, LGBTQ plus people. They want to define sex as biological sex defined at birth. They would be ending all pending hearings from the Equal Opportunities Committee, where employees have filed discrimination lawsuits against their companies on the basis of the fact that they're transgender. So those cases would not be heard if Project 2025 were to be rolled out. It would be a major setback in terms of LGBTQ plus rights, especially in employment. And our final case that we're looking at is United States versus Skermeti. So a 15-year-old transgender girl in Tennessee wants to transition with the permission of her parents. And Tennessee was basically like, nope, we have a total ban on gender affirming care for minors. Which is unconstitutional because it's discrimination on the basis of sex. You can't withhold health care from people, but because we have a stacked court, like Elizabeth said in her interview, this is probably going to be decided that it's not unconstitutional to ban gender affirming healthcare for minors. So a lot of states would probably follow suit with total bans, which would suck.
Yeah.
Things are looking grim under Project 2025.
Very true.
A lot of trans people like us are feeling really disheartened right now. I was definitely feeling disheartened first couple days after the election news came out, but I attended my Foundations for Global Community Health class. We had a guest speaker. His name is Greg Gonsalves. He was a big voice in the AIDS organization ACT UP, and he was the voice that I really needed, because he said, you know what, there are always going to be people to fight for you. The movement for trans people is not new. It's been around for years and years and years, since before us, since before him. And realistically, Project 2025 is not going to reach 100% completion. Even though Trump won, there's still like almost 50% of the nation who voted for Kamala Harris. And those people would probably be willing to fight for our rights, guys. So Steven and I talked about a lot of negative stuff today, but it doesn't mean hope is lost. It just means that there's a lot of work ahead of us.
True.
And some of that work is being undone, but that also means that we already know the steps that it takes to get there, guys. Do you have any concluding thoughts, Steven?
No. The last guest speaker that came into one of my classes talked about fish farming, so I was trying to think if I could talk about that, but no. I think just even doing this amount of research, because we did a crazy amount of research.
Yeah.
Even as just already like trans individuals, we're not all knowing or anything, so even our eyes were opened up, and it helped that we looked at.
Anyways, I'm so not excited to edit this all, but
Oh God.
thank you for tuning in to our little pod. We'll see y'all next time.
Never.
Which is never, because we are gonna have you guys next quarter, but so much love to y'all. Yeah, I hope it recorded all of that.
Imagine it didn't.
I'm gonna oh, okay, thank God it was recording.